Hello and welcome back. We are at lecture 12 now, and in this review we're breaking down the physiology of resistance training, hence the push-up here. These are topics that lately we've been covering in lecture, including mTOR signaling, sprint training, the interference effect of concurrent training, and reviewing how strength develops over time. Again, there is overlap with this lecture and the last one, so we do have some callback questions and a little bit of that spaced repetition here. One thing new this time, we are using Bloom's taxonomy as usual. However, you may have seen a prior version of Bloom's, the original one in the 1950s, that actually used nouns, not verbs. That's the modern one. And the words were a little bit different. Some students reached out and they heard of a synthesis level in Bloom, so decided to bring that one into the fray here. So we're going to use a different triangle, but it is basically the same. Review the kind of old and new ones here as you need it. So let's do it. Question 1. Which muscle action produces force while the muscle lengthens? Is it concentric, isometric, eccentric, isokinetic, or plyometric? So starting you off pretty easy at that lower level, the apply or application level, it's eccentric, or technically eccentric if you are a linguistic purist. During eccentric actions, muscles are actively resisting load while lengthening, which is basically lowering a weight, or decelerating a limb. These kind of actions really are mechanically efficient and stressful and very important for strength retention. So make sure you focus on the negatives in your resistance training. Question 2, which method best reflects absolute muscle strength? Is it strength per kilogram body mass, strength relative to fat-free mass, total force output regardless of body size, percentage of predicted 1 rep max, or force normalized to limb length? And this one is just your absolute strength. It refers to how much force you can produce, period. This matters in activities like powerlifting or manual labor, for example, where body mass normalization is not relevant. All right, moving up to analysis. Question 3, a researcher pharmacologically blocks PPAR delta during endurance training. Mitochondrial adaptations are reduced, but not abolished. This outcome best supports which concept that we discussed in lecture? Is it that PPAR is both necessary and sufficient? PPAR is sufficient but not necessary? PPAR is necessary but not sufficient? PPAR is unrelated to endurance adaptations? Or PPAR acts only through mTOR or mTOR1? This one's kind of tricky, you got to kind of remember this. So sprint training is defined by intensity, not duration. So the efforts are brief but metabolically very demanding, relying heavily on anaerobic ATP production, large ion fluxes, and quick fatigue, which is very different from steady state work. So PPAR is sufficient but not necessary. Question 4. Why does it make physiological sense that mTOR1 is involved in muscle hypertrophy? Is it A, suppresses mitochondrial biogenesis, B, inhibits calcium signaling, C, promotes protein synthesis in response to mechanical load and nutrients, D, directly activates AMPK, or E, prevents satellite cell fusion? And this one, C, promotes protein synthesis in response to mechanical load and nutrient intake. Hypertrophy requires building new contractile protein. So mTOR1 sits right at that intersection basically of the mechanical tension, the nutrient input, and hormone signaling, making it the prime, or I guess ideal, regulator of muscle growth in response to resistance training. Question 5. When strength is normalized to fat-free mass, sex differences are exaggerated, unchanged, slightly increased, considerably reduced or eliminated, or only present in the lower half of the body, for things like squats, for example. And D is considerably reduced or eliminated. So men and women may potentially differ in absolute strength, but once you normalize fat-free mass, those differences are just considerably reduced or just nearly eliminated, which means if one person is stronger than another, it is mainly due to muscle quantity rather than intrinsic muscle quality. So we don't worry about sex differences. All right, question 6. Satellite cells are thought to contribute to hypertrophy primarily by increasing number of muscle fibers, enhancing connective tissue stiffness, donating nuclei to growing muscle fibers, increasing calcium sensitivity, or activating AMPK. And this one is C, donating nuclei to growing muscle fibers. So this is an interesting one that we don't really cover too much in lecture. As muscle fibers grow, they require additional myonuclei. So satellite cells provide those nuclei, which supports the muscle ability to just continually sustain higher rates of protein synthesis during hypertrophy and therefore grow. So there is a role for satellite cells, and that is one of them. Question 7. Rapamycin administration during resistance training would most directly impair what? Neural adaptation, mTOR1 mediated protein synthesis, calcium release from sarcoplasmic reticulum, AMPK activation, or eccentric force production. And that one is B, mTOR1 mediated protein synthesis. So rapamycin is a direct mTOR inhibitor. Since mTOR1 drives that resisted training induced protein synthesis, blocking it would therefore blunt hypertrophy, even if the training stimulus is present. So rapamycin is a very fascinating signaling molecule. All right, we are at a new level now, the synthesis level. Which sequence best reflects the temporal progression of resistance training adaptations? So does it go from hypertrophy to neural adaptation to satellite cell activation? Neural adaptation, hypertrophy, satellite cell contribution, satellite cell activation, neural learning, hypertrophy, mTOR2 activation, endurance adaptation, hypertrophy, AMPK activation, protein synthesis, strength loss. Tried to guide you to that one. It's neural adaptation that leads to hypertrophy, that leads to satellite cell contribution. So strength training improves very quickly at first due to neural learning and coordination. Those structural changes, hypertrophy, satellite cell involvement that we talked about before, occur later on in the response, explaining why strength increases before visible muscle growth occurs. All right, we're at that top level now in the older triangle. Which population is most appropriate for direct 1 rep max testing and why? Is it older adults for improved bone density? Is it cardiac patients for an accurate workload prescription? Is it athletes for familiarity and neuromuscular control? Is it pre-adolescents for fast neural learning? Or is it beginners for minimal injury risk? And this one's athletes. So athletes are best suited for a true 1 rep max because they can safely express, so to speak, that maximal force. They can understand the technique and they already know how to minimize risk, unlike beginners or older adults or certain clinical patient populations which are at a much higher risk of hurting themselves. That's kind of the priority here. First, make sure no one gets hurt with this. And question 10, which training scenario most likely produces interference? I love this question. Is it sprint training alone? Is it resistance training with adequate recovery? Is it high volume endurance training combined with hypertrophy-focused lifting? Is it low intensity aerobic recovery days? Or is it periodized resistance training? Again, try to lead you to this answer. It's high volume endurance combined with hypertrophy-focused lifting. So your high volume endurance training certainly activates AMPK, which can therefore blunt mTOR1 signaling. And when you combine this with a hypertrophy-focused lifting regimen, this is going to create some competing signals, which is that classic interference effect. There's also the timing of doing one before the other. For example, if you do one exercise bout and you deplete a lot of nutrients and reserves, when you try to do the second exercise bout, you have nothing left and you're not going to get the same response that you were looking for. So if you do an exhaustive effort first and then jump to your next exercise bout, you may not get the same neural and hormonal and therefore muscle hypertrophy response. All right, that's it. I'll see you in the next video.